Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
Hey, Katie. How's it going?
It's hot. Still, believe it or not, it is so hot out on the East Coast these days.
It is so hot. It's so hot that I'm actually checking the weather for Ironman Lake Placid for 2025.
And does it say that it's hot? Is it going to be hot? It's
going to be wicked hot, yeah. Well, I already posted, I'm just posting daily updates on the Facebook page, just saying that 2025 looks like a really hot year, guys. Just be prepared.
I'm going to post on 2026 and we can just have our bases covered till the end of time.
Exactly right. Well, they're going for another 3 years, so we probably should just keep it updated every
We're going to get Kevin on the last one, just completely max out the weather forecast till the end of time.
Exactly.
But yeah, this episode is actually going to go live right before Ironman Lake Placid. So good luck to all of our athletes. We are super excited. I will be on course, so excited to be cheering for everybody, but it's going to be a really, really awesome weekend for the Endurance Drive.
It's such a great day. I'm sorry. I'm actually going to miss it. I'll be in California seeing some family, but it'd be the first Ironman Lake Placid I've missed in a while. So yeah, good luck to everybody out there. And also, I think Coach Kevin will be out there as well, too, with his whole 150 family members that he has.
Yes, he will have that covered. And Jim, I would say you've put in your time spectating Ironman Lake Placid, which is a point that we will return to in this episode. So I am more than happy to take the spectator shift for this Ironman.
Yeah, like you recovering from the Cohasset try. I'm just recovering from the Ironman Lake Placid, spectating over the years. So that's another section we can do, right? Yeah.
Yes, it was. And I really thought we were going to make it through this whole episode without mentioning Cohasset, but here we are, minute 2.
We're going to start right from it. Yeah, it's what the people want. So,
well, with that, I think it is time to transition to coaching and training insights. And actually, before we even go there, this episode is going to be a little bit different. We have so many insights and so many listener questions and challenges and gear and all that stuff that we're actually just going to focus on those. So there's not one big topic. I hope people aren't too disappointed about that, but hopefully we'll be able to share a bunch of different pearls of wisdom in this insights and questions format.
Yeah, shout out to our listeners and to our athletes just providing lots of great questions. So thanks a lot, you guys.
All right. Well, do you want to kick us off, Jim?
I think I'll kick us off because, so speaking of heat and humidity, I don't know, Katie, is your Training Peaks comments just full of people going like, oh my gosh, this is just awful. What am I going to do? And everything's going terrible out there. What's happening on your Training Peaks end?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's interesting as a coach. I feel like often comments will come in themed batches where it's like lots of people are all saying the same stuff. And that's because a lot of my athletes are all in the same area and everyone is dealing with this weather. So absolutely have seen a lot of people who are honestly just feeling pretty discouraged by how the heat and humidity has been affecting their training and their overall feeling and their performance.
Yeah, exactly. Same here as well, too. I think most of our athletes are knowing, but we've got some folks in the Midwest and down south and even overseas. And so it's hot everywhere. So anyway, I thought I'd start the coaching and training insights with, I'm calling it, how to identify when the workout isn't going well and what to do, and just try to give you guys some practical things you can do when things just start sort of going off the rails, shall we say. So in this heat and humidity, you may find this internal dialogue, which may sound familiar. And it goes like, quote, I've worked too hard to run at this pace and heart rate. I guess I'm not fit. My race is going to be a disaster if I perform like this. Or maybe this sport isn't for me. These are actually all quotes I've seen actually recently in Training Peaks. Are you seeing similar things, Katie, on your end?
It's funny. These look like quotes that came straight out of my athletes. So I think we're absolutely on the same page with people feeling pretty beat down by the heat.
Yeah. So if this is something that feels familiar to you, similar to you, here's a quick way to sort of recalibrate your emotional state. And so I'm just going to have sort of 6 steps here. So the first one is that I just want you to, if you're running, this usually happens mostly when it's running, is like, I just want you to stop your watch. I mean, to start to walk, and I want you to go find some shade somewhere. That's the first thing. And the second thing is just take a few deep breaths. And it's really effective to say to yourself when you're taking a deep breath, you can say, I breathe in and then I breathe out. And just do that like 5 or 10 times. And I guarantee you with probably like 5 breaths, like you're going to kind of bring your body and mind sort of back into alignment quickly. Okay, so now you've got your breath, you're a little bit more composed, you're in the shade. And then number 3 is just like, name that feeling. What is that feeling? So for me, it's often like anger, it's frustration. This heat and humidity is killing me and just shaking with anger because it's just so hot. So then number 4 is just like notice the feeling. And is it, so is it in your head? Is it in your heart? Is your stomach, like other places? And then like, don't judge it, but just notice kind of where the feeling and the emotion is. And for me, it's often like in the head. I just start shaking and my head just gets really tight. And I just get like, my head starts to buzz a little bit. So that's sort of where I feel it. But you may feel it in your heart, you may feel it in your stomach. But again, you can just sort of notice the feeling. And then number 5 is just listen to that feeling. So like, what message is that body sharing with you about what your body needs? And then sort of what action is called for, what connection does it need? So maybe this is, maybe it's physical. Maybe you just need to stop. Maybe you need to rest. Maybe you need to walk. Maybe you need to run walk, or maybe you just need to slow way down, but just sort of notice what physical thing you might need. Maybe it's just emotional. It's like you want to reach out to your coach or your support network, maybe just a little bit of validation that, yeah, this is super hot and it's really hard to be out here. So, but either way, like, don't feel like you need to judge the feeling. Just take a couple seconds to ask how you might need support or seek support, and like, just don't overthink it. It's just, there's no obvious question and answer, I guess, and that's okay. So the practice of listening is enough. And also just then feel free to journal this and training peaks for yourself and support from your coach. And then the last one here is just letting it go. And I feel like I've been saying to a lot of athletes, like, just let it go, let it go. And I've sort of haven't been giving them any kind of steps, like the first 5 steps here. So these 5 steps, and then the last one, 6, is letting it go. So feelings are meant to share their message and then leave the body. And this usually is like 90 seconds or less. So it's pretty quick. And then you can just continue on, again, whether that's running or walking or heading back home to a cool place. So it's just a strategy that you can use. Again, it's really quick and just sort of aimed at achieving this emotional stability. And getting good at this practice will serve you on your runs, on your bikes, at home, at work, in your relationships. And I think the good part here is that endurance athletes were really good at practice. And so add this to your toolbox and you'll even be a bigger baller than what you are.
I love this so much. This is such a good 6-step routine. And I want to add in here that you can actually do this in a race if you're having a bad time. Again, it might be 90 seconds. In the context of an Ironman, that is not a lot of time. So if you find that you're on the run, it's mile 13, you feel terrible, you're too hot, and you're just checking out, it's okay to stop for a minute, go over to some shade and breathe. You can do it at an aid station. You can do it wherever you need to do. But don't think this is just for training. And honestly, practicing it in training will make it easier to execute and then emotionally regulate in racing. And I think if you do this before things get really bad, this might be a way to avoid just completely shutting down. If you get into that shutdown mode, you could be on the way to a DNF. This is a nice way to save it. So practice it before it gets really, really bad. And I think this is just such a good series of steps, Jim. I love this.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And then sort of the follow-up question is that people say, okay, maybe you have some steps now, but people say, hey, but how am I going to handle the rest of the summer? It's going to be still hot, right? It's going to be hot and humid for probably the foreseeable, at least few weeks here. And so I guess the message we want to send is that, like, at this point in your season, all of our athletes are fit and you're race ready, and we don't need to chase fitness in this heat and humidity. And so you've worked for months and even for years to arrive at this place. So it's much more about now, like, it's about maintenance and about refining your skills and tactics. And so if you are suffering in this heat and humidity for the next few weeks, like, don't stress about it. Like, you guys are exactly where you should be right now, even if your race is maybe in 2 weeks or even in 6 weeks. Like, the big work has been done, and we'll get through this. This heat and humidity will pass, and we'll get through it. And not every day is going to be as oppressive as it has been, but just to send the message, like, it's going to be okay. You're super, super fit right now, and we'll get through this.
Yes, we will. Really, really powerful message there. So thanks for sharing that one, Jim. I'm going to take us now into another insight that I think is a little bit related to just how we've been feeling with our training. And this is something that has come up with a couple of my athletes recently. I've experienced it myself relatively recently, which I'll go into in a little bit of detail. But the question here is distinguishing between workout fatigue and deeper fatigue. And it's really hard to do because as athletes, we live in this state of fatigue, which makes it hard to tell when something deeper is going on. If you're putting in 800 TSS per week, you're training a lot, you're always going to be at least a little bit tired. And often we can't even shed that fatigue until we go into a taper phase. We might take a rest day, but that's not going to get us back to baseline. It might alleviate a little bit of the tiredness and soreness. So I've had a couple athletes come to me and just express not exactly feeling right, feeling kind of tired, and trying to figure out what's going on. And so I've tried to come up with a list of tips that can help you distinguish if you have just general workout fatigue or if maybe there's something a little bit deeper going on. So first thing to think about is if you feel really tired and a few days of rest doesn't make that feeling go away at all, or it doesn't get at least a little bit better, that means there can be something deeper going on. Because normally workout fatigue is something that just responds to taking a little bit of rest, taking an extra rest day, making sure it's a true rest day, so mental rest and all of that, not just really busy life stress. But again, if you're not feeling that fatigue go away after a couple of days, that's sort of a red flag. I would also say, Elena mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but if you have 3 days of workouts in a row where you feel really, really bad, you start to get outside of this rule of thirds where it's like a third of your workouts are going to feel bad and a third might feel okay and a third will feel great. I think for me, 3 days in a row of bad workouts is also a red flag, especially if there's like nothing good you can take from that, just really not exactly feeling right. Again, that could be something deeper. A third one that I've seen come up a lot is if you feel like you're getting enough sleep, but you're still exhausted, like if you wake up and you're just like, oh my gosh, I am so tired, even if your watch says that you got 8 hours of sleep, that could be something deeper. So that's something really to take note of. And then a final point is if you feel like this exhaustion is paired with other symptoms, so those could be mental health symptoms, that could be brain fog, that could be issues concentrating or focusing, it could be GI systems, anything like that, that's sort of outside the norm. All of that probably points to something deeper going on as well. And so if you've been experiencing any of this and you think, okay, this is maybe not workout fatigue, this might be something a little bit different, first, take some rest days. We're going to try and see if rest days help it. If that doesn't work, start taking note of your symptoms and then check in with your doctor. It's usually helpful to get a little bit of blood work because that can speak a lot to what's going on. And I'll mention this later in the challenge of the week. There's a lot of things that athletes are more susceptible to be kind of deficient in. So different types of vitamins and minerals and other things that can be going on. It's valuable to get that checked. Also, as always, be super intentional about fueling and hydration and rest because you want to know that you're at least nailing those things. And again, if you're not nailing those, that could be contributing to the feelings. But if you are, that's another red flag. And then finally, loop in your coach. Sometimes we can be sort of an objective person to say, yeah, this makes sense because you've really done a lot of volume and you need a big recovery week. Or maybe we've picked up on like, yeah, you've been saying you've been tired in workouts for at least 2 weeks now. This is something big. So a coach can be a really, really good partner in this. And the reason that I bring this up is that I've actually experienced a little bit of kind of weird fatigue recently. And I really thought for a while that it was just I train a lot. I'm doing these really, really big weeks. And then I started to feel like it was outside the norm of regular fatigue, things like feeling like, oh, I really need to take a nap right now, even though I slept last night and I'm not usually a napper. And I noticed it as well. I recently went to visit a friend in Colorado and I was at altitude and I have been at altitude before. I usually respond pretty well, but I was totally zapped of energy. So it just felt like something was off, even though some of my workouts have felt great. Some of them have felt not so good. So I actually got some blood work done and a lot of things came up that looked a little bit sketchy, not exactly where I want them to be. And I actually don't have answers to what all that means yet. But the point is, if you think something's wrong, it probably is. And it's super important to be proactive. So for me, this is not great timing. I'm 2 weeks out from my A race and I don't really know where things stand, but I'm taking some rest. I'm going to try and just see how things shake out in the next couple of days. And it's important to really listen to your body that way because even in A race, it's not worth compromising your health. You have to put that first. And I think fatigue is something to not mess around with if it's outside of that realm of general workout stuff. And again, not doctors, but I think coaches can be good partners in at least helping you figure out where you're at and what you should do about it.
Yeah, this is just super important. We always talk about that, stress plus rest equals growth. But as athletes, we're not always that good at the rest part. And I think it speaks to a couple of things too, is like the regular journaling in training piece. Because often as a coach, I know, for example, like what I'll do is I'll continue to schedule like workouts like week after week for folks. And I don't always plan a recovery week for people. And I'll either look for comments or people saying, hey, just sort of maybe getting tired of this workout didn't go so well. And, both you and I look for patterns in that and say, oh, look, this person for 2 days or 3 days has said, things are a little bit off. And at that point, it's like, okay, they've been working hard. Let's pull a true recovery week. And then we'll also use something like the TSB indicator in Training Peaks. And again, it's a little bit esoteric and it's sort of our job to look at that. But if you are interested, we put a link in there about the TSB indicator in Training Peaks. But that can just help validate if you're need a recovery week.
Totally. And you will find that often if you catch it early, it can be less rest than it will require if you catch it much, much, much later. So for me, at least, I'm like, okay, a couple things are off here, but I don't feel terrible yet. And I'm okay. It's time to taper. I'm really down for the idea of just like, let's completely dial stuff back. But don't let it get to the point where you don't have a choice. I've seen that happen with athletes before where they're sick, they're injured, really big and bad things happen. So really closely monitoring where you're at and taking note of those symptoms is the best way. We say it with injuries, but 1 to 2 days off can sometimes prevent 1 to 2 months off. And this is the same for this type of stuff. So just don't mess around with it. We are here to try to help you. But at the end of the day, you as the athlete have to be honest about where you're at. And if you feel tired in a workout, you should say so. And I actually went through my workout comments that I had put in my own workouts. And I was like, wow, I mentioned the word tired like in 10 out of 14 workouts in a row. Like that's a good sign that maybe we're a little bit tired. So that's on me, but definitely something to take note of. All right, so next one here, I wanted to talk about mental work in practice. We've been talking about mental work all the time, but I saw 2 really good examples Again, this was on Instagram. I've been following some professional athletes and saw some cool stuff in the last couple of days. I wanted to share that with everyone. So first, I saw a video of Mark Cavendish, who is a 39-year-old professional cyclist. He's a famous sprinter, and he's actually very famous for winning a record 35 Tour de France stages over his career. So he recently won another stage, and that's a huge deal. I think he's raced at the Tour de France like 15 times, so definitely a veteran cyclist. And he was talking about while he's racing, he generally has trouble staying happy. These are really, really long days over and over again. And he actually has been quite open about his mental health journey. But he's worked with his coach as well as, I think, a mental performance coach or something to have a word or phrase that can help him smile and stay happy when things get really hard. So he was saying that he'll have the headset in, he's listening to his coach, and the phrase is bibbidi bobbidi boo, which is a lyric from a Cinderella song. And the reason he likes that lyric is because it reminds him of this video that his wife sent him of his 2-year-old daughter at a dance class in a tutu with a magic wand dancing to that song. And so if he just hears those words, it reminds him why he's out there. And that's a way to kind of turn his mindset around. So I think we could encourage our athletes to think about, like, what is that thing or that joke or that person that can really just make you smile whenever you're having a tough time, and having that you can pull out when things get really, really hard. Everyone has something where no matter what, they just recall that memory and it makes them laugh or it makes them smile. Telling also your spectators that that's something that really helps you. They can shout it out, whether it's bibbidi bobbidi boo or something else. I think that's really, really powerful, and also such a cute story. So it's not going to be a 2-year-old in a tutu for everyone, but think about what that thing is for you and then use it in your toolbox when things get really hard, especially if you similarly have trouble being happy when you're grinding through mile 90 of Ironman Lake Placid.
So is that why I always yell at you, that's what she said on
Exactly. Yeah. I would not say I smile. It's more of like a smirk or something.
It's like, oh no, not these people again. I don't remember my friends again. They always yell, that's what she said. So yeah, I don't know. Is there a shortcut around these guys? Can I get the recycling area?
I mean, it makes me run faster if that's your goals.
Right, exactly right. No, but I love you brought this up. And yeah, Mark Cavendish, he's such a treasure. And he, like you say, he's been around for so long. And I saw the same exact thing actually on Instagram. And what's cool about, you say Mark Cavendish, like he's respected by so many people in the peloton. And because he's been doing it for so long, he's sort of like old school. So I think it's just super powerful when somebody like Mark, who's a real leader, in cycling, professional cycling, talks about mental health. So that's just shout out to him. And then it's funny, you also, when you brought this up, I saw there's a recent Rich Roll interview with Dr. David Spindler, and that's exactly who Mark referenced. And so it's funny, I saw this thing come through, I saw the Rich Roll came through, and then I saw your notes. I was like, wait a minute, this is all coming together. So anyway, we put a link in there, and I haven't listened to the Rich Roll podcast yet with Dr. David Spindler, but he's the sports psychologist who works with Mark Cavendish.
I love that. I didn't even know that. So that's a great full circle. And yeah, Tour de France stuff is so fun to follow. That is a serious mental challenge, the day in, day out of racing. So definitely recommend following that if you want to pick up more strategies from the pros. One more of these, actually, I was listening to a separate podcast from Sidious Magazine, which I've linked in the show notes. And it was an interview with Allie Wilson, who is a women's 800-meter runner who just qualified for the Olympics at the Olympic trials. She works with a mental performance coach. And honestly, she said that has been as instrumental to her performance as her regular running coach. So she works with them just as closely. It's very integrated. And this mental performance coach had taken her through what they called a burn ceremony. So this actually sounds very similar to the mental performance template that we've actually shown all of our athletes, but it has a little bit more pizzazz. So the way that this works is you have to write down all of your negative thoughts on a piece of paper. So things like, I'm not fit, or I shouldn't be here, or all these different negative thoughts that you might have about your race. This is not going to go well, I'm nervous, etc. And then on a separate piece of paper, you either reframe them. So if you say, I'm nervous, it could be, I'm excited or something, or I don't feel fit. It's like, well, look where I've come. Like, look at the progress I've made. You put all the positive thoughts on there, a separate piece of paper. And then you actually burn the negative ones. Like you burn that piece of paper and then you go ahead and say all the positive ones out loud. And again, like, I don't know if this will work for everyone, but it obviously worked for her because she qualified for the Olympics. That was not necessarily forecasted. She was not one of the favorites in this race, and she absolutely crushed it. And so I think it just speaks to the pros who are doing this, take it seriously. And a point she made was that she was very skeptical that mental work could actually give her any real edge. It sounded very woo-woo, but she said that she credits the mental work almost entirely to her performance. Obviously, you have to do the work on the track as well. But she's like, look, everyone's fit. Everybody wants it. This is the way to get your best edge.
Yeah, this is a cool idea, the burn ceremony, because I think, right, some of this mental stuff, it's like you're writing it down or you're thinking about it. But I love this idea of like physically doing something and see this visual. It's a very powerful visual, right? To actually take a pile of stuff and burn it. But also just remember, like, only you can prevent forest fires.
This is true. So don't burn it. She was actually saying she did this in a hotel room. She's like, it was very contained. Don't worry, but don't burn any hotel rooms, no forests,
Right.
no houses. Just be very careful.
What if you have a lot of negative thoughts? You're gonna be like a burn permit from like the local ward. Like, I have so many negative thoughts. I have a huge pile out there.
A burn bonfire. I love it. It's so good. We should probably do it on the streets of Placid the night before the race, right next to the blessing of the athletes.
We should, invite all the athletes to take all their negative thoughts and throw into a big thing right there on the lake shore, like right on the beach, actually. Sort of have like a beach bonfire at night. Right, exactly. Yeah.
Different Drive Beach bonfire. We'll see you at 8 p.m. the night before the race.
So who do we get a hold of? What's the race director's email again? Yeah.
Kevin.prunty@gmail.com. All right. Next insight for me. So this is from an athlete experience. I had a post-race call with an athlete. So shout out to Gigi. We've talked about her in the podcast before, but she had a really interesting experience at her most recent 70.3 that I wanted to share. And she called it the devastating reverse bonk. So that's just super funny to start with. But this is something we probably don't talk about a lot because we are so big about fuel really well. You don't want to bonk. We're going to absolutely nail our fueling. But anyway, she had a very concentrated carb drink in her front bottle. I think there was something like 150 grams of carbs in this one bottle. And she came out of the swim. It was kind of a gross swim in the Springfield River or whatever that is. And she was super thirsty. It's really common to get out of the water and just have like you've had sediment in your mouth. It's not a good feeling. So she's super thirsty. And she said she ended up taking in close to that 150 grams of carbs in the first 45 minutes, which was a lot of the nutrition that she had. And it went down really easy because she was thirsty and because it was liquid. So it'd be really hard to get in 150 grams of carbs in 45 minutes worth of Cliff Bars, for example, but it's pretty easy to do if you have liquid. Unfortunately, that meant that she had a lot of trouble fueling for the rest of the ride because her stomach wasn't super happy with getting that high concentration of carbs super, super quickly. And the good news is she actually saved the day by she had packed a bunch of different kind of alternative fuel that she wasn't actually planning. She didn't have it in her nutrition plan, but she had some bars with her. And she's like, I cannot drink another sip of this carb stuff, but I can get the bars in. And she actually had an incredible race. She had a great bike. She had a really, really strong run. So she absolutely saved it. But I think it was scary to have that happen early on. And if she hadn't had those extra bars, then she would have been in a tough situation where you're still going to need to fuel later in the bike, but your stomach might just not allow you to. So 3 lessons from this to avoid the devastating reverse bonk. Number 1, I would say pack a plan B fueling strategy if possible, or be open to relying on aid station options if your nutrition isn't working, or if you lose it, like in your rabbit story, Jim, when you lost your entire nutrition, you want to have something in your pocket that you can whip out. So a little bit of choice there is nice. Number 2, you do have to pace yourself with liquid carbs. Again, we're not trying to restrict intake here, but save some for the race and think about like, okay, I want to finish this bottle in an hour, depending on how many carbs it is. Make that part of your race plan and try to stick to it. And then number 3, I think it's useful to have a water bottle just kind of sitting in T1 because even a few sips can help with that post-swim thirsty feeling, even just rinsing your mouth out, especially for salt water or gross rivers, anything like that. And it can even give you a quick hit of carbs to start off. So again, way better to overfuel than underfuel, but this is just avoiding some of the GI consequences that can come from this type of situation, the devastating reverse bonk.
Yeah, I love that. It's great. Thanks, Gigi, on that. Yeah, great tips and insights there. Yeah, and we always say too, it's funny on race day, it always seems like your taste buds can change as well, especially as you get later on in the race. So having that plan B fueling strategy, or just bringing like, I have, this is 100% capacity, but I'm going to bring 150% capacity because I'm going to bring extra stuff because I want to have the option to like, I always like, the raspberry fig bars, but I get out there and I don't want to eat raspberries, but I will have the apple fig bar, for example, or something completely different. And then sort of second of all, I was like, weirdly, I have found that salt pills are a great remedy for a sloshy stomach in a race. And I don't know if that's just psychological, but just taking, like if I have a really sloshy stomach and just be like, putting a few salt pills down just seems to help. And it seems to help like right away too. And it's probably just psychological, but for some reason, for me, it's just always worked.
No, I feel like that works for me too. I don't know that it's entirely psychological. We'll have to ask someone on the science behind that. But the great thing about salt pills is they're also really small. So it's so easy to just shove a few of those in a Ziploc bag, put them in your bento box. And I know that it's sometimes hard to carry like 12 bars. We know that that's tricky, but salt pills are super easy to do. So at the end of the day, a combination of liquid carbs, bars, maybe you got some gels or blocks, and then the salt pills, I think is a great kind of spread. And that means practice with all that stuff beforehand. If you're racing in 3 days, I wouldn't change anything right now, but I would say salt pills are something you could throw in as a backup option.
Yep.
All right, so last one here. This is a big section, and we're going to kind of like riff on it back and forth. This could almost be its own podcast topic, but we have Ironman spectating coming up this weekend. There's a lot of other spectating that's going to happen in. And so we wanted to put together a guide for how to crush Ironman or 70.3 spectating. And this is tips that can be for your spectators, but also for your athletes with managing spectators, because that's a little bit of a different experience. And the broader point here is, as athletes, we do so much of our training alone. And so it can kind of be a little bit different to have to manage having a bunch of people enter that circle on race day. That's something you probably haven't had in your race simulations. And while it can be really great to have all the people you care about cheering for you, it can also add a layer of stress to just be managing all of that, often with people that don't really know too much about Ironman. So a couple things to think about. The best way to ward off any of that tension is, number one, communicate about what you expect to need well in advance with your spectators. You can even make them a guide that uses some of these principles, and we will link these principles in the show notes. Number two, pre-plan all your spectator logistics like early in the week, so you don't have to think about them on race morning or the day before the race. You shouldn't be shepherding people around and dealing with that, because you need to focus on you on race morning. And number three, if it's possible, if you have a whole bunch of people coming, your mom, your dad, your uncle, your cousin, your 57 best friends, all of that, designate a spectator captain who you trust and who can be in charge of all that delegating and answer questions. It's awesome, especially if they know a little bit about Ironman, so that they can kind of help figure all that out. But I've found that if I'm trying to be logistics captain in addition to racing, I get pretty stressed out. I talked about this in the context of the dreaded coacid try. So just think about having someone who can take care of all that stuff for you. And then I also want to do a broader point about spectating for spectators. So if you're a spectator who your athlete has said, hey, listen to this podcast, this is for you, it's really important to keep in mind that Ironman and 70.3 spectating is really, really hard and exhausting work. I would say it's almost as hard as doing an Ironman. I don't know, Jim, would you agree with me on that?
I think it's pretty hard. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely spectated more than I've done Ironmans. And I could say that, yeah, it's a super long day. Because, often you're getting up with your athlete or you're getting up thereabouts. And just things like you're skipping breakfast, right? Or you're like, well, I mean, I don't get up at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning often. So you're sort of up and you're like, as a spectator, like your stomach kind of churning and you're getting coffee at 5 o'clock in the morning. And you're like, I haven't had breakfast yet, but I've drank like 4 cups of coffee already. And then just the heat exposure just all day long. So yeah, so as we go through all this, we give you some tips on sort of what to do to sort of survive your day. Mm-hmm. But one thing I just want to back up on a little bit is that, as you're communicating with your spectators, I had a question the other day actually, and somebody said, hey, my husband will be doing this and be doing that, and can he give me this? And I was like, oh, wait, hold on. Your spectators, your support network cannot give you anything on course. So they can't hand you a water bottle. They can't hand you fueling. You have to do all that yourself. So no outside support is a really basic rule in triathlon.
Yeah, and they will give you a penalty for that, which is too bad. It's very different from the ultra scene where it's like all about the crew and that person is there for everything. So just if you're coming from that world, know that it's not exactly the same in Ironman, and definitely don't grab or take or give anything when you see anyone around you, because you can definitely end up with a penalty, which is not too great.
Yeah.
But that being said, spectators still have a lot to do with just kind of pumping the athlete up and being there when you need to be there. So we're going to go through some principles both for athletes and for spectators to make this day as seamless as possible. I mentioned this briefly, but for athletes, really helpful to make a schedule of events for your spectator squad. Not even everyone knows that a triathlon is swim, then bike, then run, or the idea that there's a transition area and how all of that works. And it's helpful to walk them through what's going to happen during the day. So you can even write all that out. You can send it in a text, whatever that is. Make sure that they have sort of a guide to follow. And if you have preferences for what you expect to want or need at different times, for example, I really want someone to be on the Lisa G's hill to cheer me up the hill, or that's going to be carnage. I don't want you to see me over there. Like, I'd rather have you at the finish line. Stuff like that is really important to communicate, because you don't want your interactions with spectators to be a source of stress. You only want that to pump you up. I find that it can be kind of fun to give people different jobs too, to keep them busy. So Colleen, who's amazing, has always crushed our social media. And Jim, for me, you've been in charge of strategy and real-time race updates on like, okay, there's a girl in your age group 4 minutes up the road, whatever that is. Connor, my husband, has always been that primary emotional support person. I've delegated a lot of different things. People who know my dad, he loves to go Facebook Live during these races, so that's his job. But it's nice because then everyone feels like they're part of this bigger thing and it keeps them busy. So they've got something that's their focus and you're also getting your needs as an athlete. And then last thing here is if you have a lot of spectators coming and if they're pretty mobile, I would say encourage them to spread out, especially on the run course. So you have people to look forward to at different times. I think, Jim, you and Colleen have always gone to Recycle Lane, which we've talked about on the Ironman Lake Placid episode for me, which is pretty far out from town. It's like at least probably 2 miles outside of town. And so it's great to have the whole crowd in town, but knowing that I'm going to see someone else that I know 2 miles out is really helpful. And a pro tip there is if you as a spectator bring a bike, you can get all over the run course and it's really fun and it is so much faster than trying to walk 2 miles out. I would not recommend that because it's going to be so much time on feet, but having a road bike is a really nice thing to do.
Yeah, the road bike is, that's the pro move. We finally learned that one. And just one note on that is if you do have the bike on, say, the run course, you just have to be sort of careful of like, you want to get off your bike around the aid stations and sort of like, people really want you on course. But if you're very polite about it, like you walk your bike, for example, like down the Lisa G's Hill and then maybe walk it around the first aid station and then you can go out past the brewery with your bike. And so just be aware that the course kind of is, quote, closed and it's only for Ironman runners. But if you just play your cards just subtly and be very respectful, you can bike around and get to places. And like you say, Katie, it's like spread out because everybody's concentrated up, in town. This is for any race, right? But if you can get a mile or two out, that's amazing for athletes.
Absolutely. And actually, one other note on bringing a bike. I spectated the Boston Marathon with our friend Colleen, who does our social media. And unfortunately, her bike did get stolen during that experience. So don't leave your road bikes unattended and bring a lock if you're going to be going inside. There's so many people that, especially like in a city, it's really easy for stuff to get swiped. I think that's hopefully less likely at a place like Placid, but it is something to have in your bag is a bike lock. So you can go into restaurants, you can go places, and maybe don't bring your nicest, fanciest TT bike as your spectator bike. Honestly, a commuter bike would be a great option here just because you're not there for the bike workout during the racing and spectating.
Yep.
So next point here is if you have older or kind of less mobile spectators, think about parking them somewhere where they can see a lot, but they're able to sit down. So things like bring a lawn chair, find a spot in the shade. In Lake Placid, for example, there's a bunch of restaurants that actually overlook the swim. So that's a really good place to go. And then along Mirror Lake Drive, you could set up a chair in the shade somewhere. That's not a bad place to be. But just don't underestimate if people are older and they're less mobile, it can be a lot to be outside for that long. So take care of relatives and family members and make sure that people who are younger or more mobile can be kind of keeping tabs on that. You don't want your grandfather who's come to get heat stroke or anything while you're racing. That's a big stressor. So just be aware that this is like a really big and challenging day. Question for you, Jim, actually.
Yep.
At Ironman Lake Placid last year, you got the VIP Spectator Pass. Was that worth it? And can you tell us about what that is?
Yeah. So, thanks. Shout out to our friend Rhiannon, who actually got me the VIP pass. So I didn't pay for it. I don't know how much it costs, but I think it's a little pricey. But with that said, it was really worth it for me because we had, 10 athletes racing last year and just other folks. So a lot of people out there, and what the VIP pass allows you to do is there's actually, the best part was there was food up at the finish area. So I could sort of rotate in and out, grab a cold drink, grab a snack, go back to the finish area, go back out on course, and I kept rotating. And they also had private bathrooms there as well too. So they always had some place to kept going back to. So anyway, if you do have somebody who's coming to spectate who wants to, throw some money around a little bit, I think that is kind of worth having the VIP pass.
Absolutely. So it's definitely something, if someone wants to give you a gift as a racer, they can get the spectator pass and then they're going to have a better time. So it's great all around. Okay, so here's some tips for spectators at Ironman and even half Ironman that we can go through. I would say it's nice to be with the athlete before the race if they want you there, but you should have a conversation about that before then. Some people like to be the total Michael Phelps, headphones on, hood on, don't want to talk to you, don't want anything. And other people really appreciate having someone there. And while you can't have support during the race, you can take their morning clothes, their phones, stuff like that. I've always kind of given my stuff to my family or to you, Jim, just because I don't want to deal with the whole morning clothes bag checkout situation. So that's something that you can do. Next thing I would say is you are there to support, which means not asking too many questions on race morning. I find, especially questions about performance, that's the worst thing that you can do. I personally really don't like that. And so sometimes just being like a calm and quiet and steady presence is the best thing that you can do because your racer is going to be really nervous, and making things feel normal and not putting any pressure on the race itself is really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think this one, I'll stop you there because this one is so important because I think, as a spectator, you're jazzed up, you're worked up about the whole thing. And so you're probably anxious as well for yourself and for your athlete, your friend. And so, yeah, you think you're sort of healthy, like, what do you think you're going to swim in time? What are you going to bike in? What are these goals? And it's like, this is not the time. Please, 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 please. If you want to ask those questions, we have that conversation weeks, away. But for race morning, yeah, your job, you say, is to be calm and quiet, support where you can. But yeah, as few questions as possible on a race morning for your athlete.
And for the athlete, you can actually word against that, where if you make a spectator guide and you want people to know, you can say, hey, I think I'm going to swim between a 105 and a 110 or something. If you don't know, that's okay too. And just tell your family, like, I will be out of the water when I am out of the water. There's a tracking chip. You can get the app. That's another tip, is make sure everybody in your family has the app and is keeping an eye on it. But again, don't ask those questions right beforehand, and you can make your guide as detailed as you want for knowing what's going to happen. So then for tips of what you should do during the day, we usually, as spectators, like to watch the swim start and finish, because the swim is not as long as the bike or the run. So by the time your athlete goes in, maybe you're hanging out for a little while, but within a little over an hour and a half, they should be back. Then after that, we usually like to go get brunch, rest, chill out for most of the bike, because the bike is so long. So if you're just standing there for 6, 7, 8+ hours waiting for your athlete, you're going to be exhausted by the time it's time to spectate the run. And the run, especially if it is one of these like double out and back courses, or if it moves through a town, you will have a lot of opportunities to see your athlete. So I say use their entire time as the bike for you. I often will like go back to my Airbnb if it's nearby, lay down, rest. Maybe I'll do a workout if I was trying to get something in as a coach, but all of that is super, super important, because you don't want to just be sitting and waiting in the sun. It's way too long of a day to do that.
Yeah, one point here is that I think, with those 2-loop courses, there is a possibility, if you're tracking your athlete, to see them as they come through to bike special needs in these races. But I like, as a spectator or a coach, like to say, hey, I'm probably not going to see you, because you do want to have flexibility. Like you say, go back to the Airbnb or go get something to eat, or even just go for a swim or do something else. And so it's a fun surprise if you do see them and you see people's faces really light up and they're coming through for the second loop and you're screaming, hey, Chris, whatever. Hey, Katie. And they're like, they didn't expect to see you, but they see you with a big smile. But I think, yeah, the default is to say, hey, I would love to see you when you come through back through Lake Placid or any of these other places that have 2 loops, but I probably won't, just because the day is, as we would say in Ironman, like, it's all about the run. And so for spectating, it's all about the run spectating, because it's a day when you get with, the first loop of the bike course, you're still a third of the way through the day at that point. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree with that. I think it's a nice bonus, but it doesn't have to happen. And if you do really want to see your athlete, use the tracker and don't just wait. You'll know when they're, say, 5 miles out, and then that's an okay time to try to get in position. But you're going to see them for all of like 8 seconds as they roll by. So that may or may not be worth it. Yeah. And then finally, for the run, it's awesome to be there as much as you can, but it will be a long day. It'll probably be near dinner time. So make sure you're getting yourself something to eat during that time, especially if you know, like, hey, they're headed on out and back and they're not going to be here for an hour and a half. You've built yourself a lot of time there. I think expect that you're probably going to do a lot of grab and go food that day, but there's a lot of places that will be like selling hot dogs on the side of the road, or you can get a piece of pizza or something like that. There is food available, but just be strategic about it. And I think the most important thing is be there so that you can kind of meet them when they cross the finish line. That's when they really are going to need help and support, and they're going to want the photos. So whatever you can do to be at the finish line is really important. And try to scout out where the athletes are going to go when they cross that finish line. So often there's they get their medal. Some people get pushed right into the medical tent. Some people can kind of exit the ring a little bit. But I had an experience at Kona this year where I crossed the finish line and they take you into this post-race area and they're trying to give you food. And it took a long time. And then I exited that area. I did not have my phone and I could not find anyone in my family. I couldn't find my dad. I couldn't find Connor. And I had this whole lost child moment where my legs hurt so much. I had no idea where my family was. And I had to go up to some random guy and say hi, can I use your phone to call my dad? And so me, 27 years old at the time, is Dad, can you come pick me up? I'm scared. So all that is to say, it was not his fault. It was just that they took me into the post-race processing and it took a long time. But in general, try to figure out where athletes going to exit and help them out, because they might literally need to get carried home, and it's helpful to be there for them for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I see you have listed here a spectator bag of essentials, which is you have to think of this day like a backpacking trip. It's a full day, like you say, a comfortable backpack, your hats, your sunglasses, your sunscreen, your water, portable phone charger. That's a key thing you got to have, because you're going to be checking the tracker all the time. So make sure you have one of those. And like you say here, bonus points, this ultralight camp chair, any kind of camp chair you can bring is awesome. But I want to tell you a story about last year. So we were out spectating at the recycling lane, And we called down to the local brewery, which is just down the road, and said they were serving pizza. And I said, hey, we called up and ordered a couple pizzas. So I walked down to the brewery, picked up the pizza, and then I cruelly walked back along the run course holding 2 big boxes of pizza. And people were looking at me going, oh man, I want a piece of pizza so bad. I'm like, yummy pizza.
That is not a spectator tip. That is a cruel thing to do. I'm glad I did not see you at that time because I would have been pissed off.
Only that we needed food. Hey, it's a long day out there. So.
Oh my gosh, it was definitely a harder day for you, I would say, than me or anyone else.
No, I think it's equal. But anyway, yes, that was a cruel thing. But anyway, you got to eat, right?
You do. Yeah. Well, anyway, check out our extended show notes for this extended bag of essentials. We've got things like a comfortable backpack, hat, sunglasses, sunscreen, water with electrolytes, lots of snacks, warm layers, raincoat, umbrella, again on that portable charger, and comfortable walking shoes. I would say dress like you're going hiking, like dry fit clothing is all great. And you want to layer up. It can get cold, especially if you're going to be spectating into the dark and early in the morning. So having a lot with you is great, while also keeping your bag as light as possible since you're going to be carrying it for a long time.
Then I think one thing we mentioned in the Ironman Lake Placid was sort of like the whole parking situation and shuttle situation and where are people parking and where you need to get to like afterwards. So like you said, like have your spectators or somebody meeting you at the exit so they can carry you, support you, because sometimes, you're going to have to go, I don't know, a mile or two back to get back to your car. So yeah, you definitely need support. So that's the most important part, is letting somebody know like, I'm going to need help when I get out of here. So please be there.
Definitely. And for athletes, biggest thing is make sure to thank your spectators. It's a big day for them, and they have also supported you through this entire journey. So you might be feeling terrible, but whatever you can do to kind of give them a smile and show your support. It is okay if you can't do that during the race, but after, there's a really nice moment to be able to just say thank you. And spectators, thank you for supporting our athletes. You make it fun for us as coaches and for us as racers. It's just awesome to have that whole community.
Yeah, so between your dry heave and your all body cramps, just be sure to thank your spectators.
Exactly. I mean, I'm saying this and I know that I am a terror to be around during the race. Like, I definitely can be grateful after, but I think you probably remember me just growling, "Where's Jim?" at Connor when he was trying to pump me up because I needed an update on where the other women in the field were. So
poor Connor. Yes, exactly right. He took the hit that day. Yeah. So shout out to Connor.
Totally. All right. Well, those are our insights. We are going to jump now right into listener questions. And as I thought, we're going to fill out a full episode with just all this kind of bite-sized content. But I think this is a fun one that we got asked a couple of weeks ago. So shout out to Laura for sending in this question. She said, I would love to hear more ideas and suggestions for fun and unique adventures that people can do across a range of abilities. Being in a relatively urban place, I don't always know what cool things I might like doing or places to explore. Would love to get Katie and Jim's top 10 list of best adventure workouts or trips or activities. So this is something we love to talk about, and we actually do have an episode that covers adventures as training. So go back into our archive for that, and we've linked it in the show notes. But I think here we're going to focus on some of our favorite adventures in New England. That's where a lot of our athletes are. Most of these are a pretty easy day trip from the greater Boston area or from the Upper Valley, if that's where you're coming from. Not that far from also Montreal, Burlington, places like that. Portland, Maine as well. So Jim, do you want to kick us off with our favorite trail and mountain adventures in New England?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, like I say, go back to the adventures as training, because I think we went sort of from easy to harder on that list and that adventures for training in those podcast notes right here. So, but yes, some of our favorites here are the first one, Franconia Ridge, classic. Everybody's heard about it. Go on a great day, and your mind will be blown.
Awesome. And second one here that's a little bit less known than Franconia is Mount Chikura. This is actually not one of the New Hampshire 4,000 footers, but it has one of the best views in the Whites. And I love it because you can see all of the Whites from there and most of the 4,000 footers. So really awesome open ridge. It's on the Kancamagus Highway, which is a really fun drive to do as well as bike ride. So definitely recommend checking out Chikura.
Yeah, it looks like from far away. It kind of looks like the Matterhorn. It's got a real bald top, and it's fairly easy to get through from southern New Hampshire and Maine and Boston. So our third one here is if you can venture just a little bit further up to Mount Katahdin in Maine. There are a few little logistical things I think you have to get, like a parking permit or a camping permit. It's a little bit farther out there. So there's some pre-planning, but if you can get up to Mount Katahdin, it is well worth the trip.
Yeah, it's a very different feel than the White Mountains just because it's the only really big mountain in that area. So it's just kind of looking out and it's flat everywhere. And it has this plateau where you get up on the ridge and then you can just kind of walk and it's flat for miles and miles. So cool to check out Katahdin. And you can turn that into a whole trip with Baxter State Park. Highly, highly recommend. You might see a moose. That'd be super cool. So Katahdin is amazing. I'm going to continue on the Maine theme actually and recommend Maine's Bold Coast. So this is if you drive way past Acadia National Park or the very top of Maine, it is sort of this untouched coastal area and some of the most beautiful, dramatic cliffs and trail running that you've seen. I took a trip there last summer, and it was just this hidden gem that not a lot of people know about. So highly recommend checking out the Cutler Coast Public Preserve Land. There's a really nice 5 and 10 mile trail loop. Not really like you could backpack it if you want to, but it's not unreasonable for a day, and had such a great time there. So highly recommend.
Yeah, that's great. I've not been up that way, and I want to check that out. Our next one here is the Presidential Traverse, a classic. Everybody's heard about it. Most people go north to south, and so start in the northern presidentials, and then from Appalachia to Crawford Notch, but you can also go from Crawford Notch to Appalachia as well. It's a very different thing. And if you're really super ambitious, you can do what's called the Presidential Picnic. And the Presidential Picnic is you do the full Prezi Traverse, which is still a really, really big day. But the Presidential Picnic is then you ride your bike back from Crawford's back to Appalachia. So I actually, in full disclosure, I have not done that yet. That's still on my list. But start with the Presidential Traverse, or just start with anything in the north or in the southern presidentials.
Yeah, and this is a funny one because many people have actually been at Mount Washington, which is the tallest mountain in New Hampshire, and it's right in the middle of the Presidential Traverse. But you'll find that all the other presidentials are pretty nice because you cannot drive up them, so it's quiet and there's just hikers around. And then you show up on top of Washington and it is a total shit show. It's like thousands and thousands of tourists. And I always make a point of taking a selfie of the line to take a picture on top of Mount Washington. Every other mountain, you can take a selfie on top of the mountain. This one, you take a selfie with a picture of the line to take the summit selfie. So anyway, that's Mount Washington. But yeah, love the Presidential Traverse, and we highly recommend that one.
Yeah, well, I always make a point of getting a ho-ho on top of Mount Washington, so.
As you should.
As you should, right? I'll have a hot dog, a black coffee, and a ho-ho, yeah.
If you want another vibe that does not have anything that you can drive up, you can check out the Pemi Loop. So the Pemi Loop, I would say, is like an even beefier version of the Prezi. It's about 30 miles, 31 miles, and it hits, I think, 9 of the 4,000 footers or 8 or something. But it's a beautiful loop, and it's a little bit easier logistically because you get to start and end in the same place. And it covers Frank Ridge as well as the Bonds and Garfield and Galehead and a lot of really cool other mountains that are in the Whites.
And something, if you're really extremely, extremely ambitious, you can do the Hut Traverse. Again, I have not done the full Hut Traverse at one shot. A couple years ago, I did part of it, and you guys did the Hut Traverse over 2 days, staying in Crawford. So that's kind of a cool thing. So the Hut Traverse is hitting all of the huts in the AMC White Mountains. So usually people start at Carter and they end at Lonesome.
Definitely. And we've been kind of talking a lot about these 4,000-foot mountains in the Whites. There are actually 67 mountains that are over 4,000 feet in New England. And that's a nice project to be tacking off as well. So there's a bunch that are in Vermont, there's a bunch that are in Maine, and then the most are in New Hampshire. But we took, I think, most of COVID to finish you had done it before, but I finished all of the New Hampshire 4,000 footers. And that's a really manageable adventure where you can do a lot of shorter day hikes. You can kind of peak bag if you're going to do a Pemi or a Prezi or Hut Traverse to hit some of these. But that's a really nice kind of lifetime goal. And the funniest thing is I did all the ones in New Hampshire and I did all the ones in Maine, and I've done Mount Mansfield in Vermont once. I am missing the other 4 Vermont peaks, and they're like really easy hikes relative to all the other ones I've done. And so I'm sitting at this like New England 63 right now, and I don't know why I can't just go do Campbell's Hump and Mount Ellen and Abraham and everything, but I will do it eventually, and then I can check this off the list.
Well, I mean, you're respecting your recovery from the Coasset Triathlon, so I get it. I get it, right? When you get recovered from that, you can go do Campbell's Hump. So I just, I'm glad, Katie, I'm really glad you're listening to your body. Yes.
Exactly. All right. And then the last one here, if you're interested in kind of through hiking, so really long hikes, we recommend checking out the Appalachian Trail, which goes through parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. There's the Long Trail, which is part of that in Vermont, and then that goes into northern Vermont as well. You can do the Dartmouth 50, which is a 50-mile trek from the Moose Lock Ravine Lodge back to Dartmouth's campus. A lot of our Dartmouth athletes will do that. And then Maine has the 100-mile Wilderness, which is a backpacking route that covers the last 100 miles of the AT. If you want to hear about when Jim and I did the 100-mile Wilderness, you can check out, I believe, our durability episode where we talk about that adventure. But these are really, really cool backpacking trips. And you will also see a lot of thru hikers, which is always a unique experience to see how the other half lives on the thru hiking culture.
Yeah. And just sort of backing up to that, the New Hampshire 4,000 footers. It's a great project over, again, if you're ambitious, you could do it over summer, but usually do it over a few years. And the cool part about it is that there's some really long hikes and there's some really short hikes. And, we're always sort of talking about durability. And so an organic durability project to say, I'm going to start taking down, along with my triathlon training, I'm going to start taking down some of the New Hampshire 4,000 footers. You'll end up with some short days, you'll end up with some really long days. And some of those long days are going to feel just like, like a half Ironman or an Ironman day where you're sort of out moving all day long and having to think about nutrition and pacing and all that.
Absolutely, yeah. Hiking is the best form of cross-training for Ironman, in our opinion. So those are our trail and mountain adventures. Let's talk a little bit about some bike adventures. So this is something I think we haven't done on the podcast yet, but we have a few favorite rides in New England if you're big about doing a century bike ride or something that's really long. So Jim, why don't you take the first one for this?
Sure. So the first one here, we call it the White Mountains Century, and typically that's starting in North Woodstock and then going up towards Route 3 to the Flume, and you have to sort of know where to get on the Franconia bike trail, but go to the Flume, and then the bike trail goes up through Franconia Notch, and you have to stay on the bike trail because the only road that goes through Franconia at that point is 93, so you can't bike on 93. So you spend the first hour working your way up the bike trail, and then you work your way to Twin Mountain, and then take a right and go through Crawford Notch and have a wonderful descent down to Bartlett. And the short version is to then take from Bartlett, take over Bear Notch Road, which goes back over to the Kangamangas, or the longer Century version is to go into West Side Road, which is in North Conway, get into Conway, have some food, and then jump on the Kangamangas and come all the way back over to North Woodstock.
Yeah, and that's actually a ride that you can do on a TT bike, which is cool. It is hilly for sure, but it's a nice placid prep day. So we've used that as a placid race sim a couple of times before, and it is just so beautiful. Although one thing I would say is be careful of railroad tracks. We talked about that on the last episode, and this route is known for really bad railroad tracks in a couple of areas. So just hit them at that perpendicular angle or just roll your bike right over them. But it is a really cool route. And
I had an athlete who did the White Mountain Century, but she did it the other way. And I will tell you that you do really definitely want to do it the way that we do it. And if you ever have questions, just reach out to us if you're knowing which way to go. But you want to go clockwise. If you go counterclockwise, because the wind is predominantly from the west. And so when you're riding from Bartlett and making your way all the way up to Crawford Notch, that's probably about 25 miles of just direct, really beefy headwind. So you definitely want to do it clockwise.
Good to know. All right, next one here is the Lamb Ride, and this is one of our favorite rides ever. So Lamb stands for Lincoln, Appalachian, Middlebury, and Brandon, which are 4 of the gaps in Vermont. And the Vermont gaps are basically, there's a lot of mountains in Vermont, and the gaps are roads that go in between these mountains. So each one of these is a pretty big climb. That's probably about 2,000 feet of climbing, I would say. It gets at least 1,500 feet for many of these climbs. And the Lamb Ride connects 4 of the gaps, LAMB. And we've done it in that order before. We've also done the Blam Ride, BLAM. You can kind of do it in any order that you like, and there's different ways to optimize for that. But it's a ride that amounts to about 100 miles and I think close to 10,000 feet of climbing. So it is really beefy. And fun fact, Lincoln Gap is actually, in one direction, it is the steepest paved mile in America. So really steep road there. And that's one of those things that you are going to be above threshold grinding in your littlest gear, and you still might not make it all the way up. It's that steep of a climb. So you want to know what you're in for. You want to have good gearing on your bike here, but it is such a cool ride. And we also have some favorite coffee and snack stops along the way. So you can kind of turn it into just an awesome Vermont rolling buffet.
Yeah, if anybody here is interested in Lamb Ride, reach out to us because we'd love to talk about this. We park in Rochester, Vermont, and we do the Brandon first, and then we do Lincoln. And there's some dirt in there, but we can give you all the great stops in Rochester at Sandy's Bakery, which is the best place in the world, and stopping at the Warren General Store and at Bristol. And so, we always love talking about this ride. So if you have any interest in this, just let us know.
And Jim, it looks like you put on here also the Vermont 6-Gap Ride. You want to tell us what that is?
Yeah, well, that was my goal. That was my A race this year. Until I had a little boo-boo. But that is a Lamb Ride, but then you tack on 2 other gaps, which is Roxbury and Rochester Gap. And so I think it ends up being somewhere around like 135 miles and about 13,000 feet of climbing. So it's a little bit of a bigger day.
That is a big boy ride, but you can work up to this by doing any of the gaps. So we've done, for example, a ride that just has A and M. That's a really nice ride. Or you could just try Lincoln on its own to see how it feels. And there's really endless variations on this because you can take each gap from either side. So definitely get creative with it, but we do have thoughts on our favorites. So reach out to us and we can share those with you.
Katie, what about the East Coast ride? Tell us about that.
This was very unique and I'm excited to share it. So in 2021, we did a really fun trip with a bunch of our friends where we created the East Coast Ride. And this was actually modeled off, we had done, Jim and I, the California Coast Ride, which is a ride that goes from San Francisco to San Diego. And what was great about this group ride, I think it was 5 days long and about 600 miles, was we had a van that was there the whole time to support us. So if you get a flat tire or if you need a snack or whatever, there's someone who's there to support you the whole way. So we were thinking, what if we replicated this on the East Coast? So we got all our friends together and we actually rented a cargo van. And then we embarked on a journey from Norwich, Vermont to Randolph, New Hampshire, which is in the Whites. So that was about 100 miles. The next day, we went from Randolph, New Hampshire to Portland, Maine, so past Mount Washington, another 100 miles. The next day, we went from Portland, Maine to Lincolnville, Maine, which was, I think, probably 90 miles. And the last day, we went from Lincolnville, Maine to Acadia National Park and ended at the top of Mount Cadillac, which is in Acadia. And it was really awesome because we just took turns driving the van. And you can do this with your friends because then people can kind of scale up or down how much riding they want to do. Some people in our group wanted to ride as much as possible. Some people were really happy with riding maybe 40 miles on a given day and then driving the van the other times. And it was really just a party the whole time. We got to stay in fun places and eat a lot of really good food, and we had good weather. And so I think this is not specific to the one route that we did. We were interested in, for example, seeing the Whites and seeing Portland and seeing Acadia, but you can connect any series of points and have someone in a car to come support you. You can even just do it with a regular car if you have a bike rack. And I think this is a really fun way to effectively do a point-to-point ride and have fun and not have the same pressure of carrying like bike packing stuff. We really only had to carry our 2 bottles and our snacks because the van was always there. And bike packing can be a lot slower and pretty expensive with all the gear. And I don't know, I just don't love to sleep outside. So it's nice to actually be able to stay somewhere nice each night.
Yeah, this was a great one. And Acadia, obviously, is, as everybody knows, in Bar Harbor, Maine, is a wonderful place to either just do it, not doing it with the East Coast ride, but just go to Acadia and ride around the carriage roads. And our last one here is one I haven't done. Again, it was on my list this year, which is 200 on 100, and that's 200 miles on Route 100 in Vermont. And you start in northern Vermont and you end at the Massachusetts border.
Absolutely. And actually, Vermont 100 is a route that you're on for a lot of the Lamb ride as well. So you can kind of get used to what that feels like if you're doing Lamb. But that's a big beefy day as well. We've got a couple more here. You put in this section, Jim, adventures I want to do. Tell us about what you're interested in doing and what's on your bucket list.
Oh, yeah. So these things have been on my list. So maybe inspire somebody and they can go do them and tell me how it was. But anyway, there's a really famous place to do open water swimming in Barton, Vermont called Crystal Lake. And the Crystal Lake is, as it sounds, I guess you see like 40 feet down. There's some ledges you can go over to. There's actually a sunken boat at the end of the lake. So that's one I want to do. Open water swimming at Lake Willoughby and hiking up Mount Pisgah and Mount Horror. And that's a very dramatic place. And it's a very dramatic sort of notch, if you will. And what's cool about going over to Lake Willoughby and Pisgah and Horror is you can see that notch. It's very distinguished from anywhere in the White Mountains. So that's a cool place to check out. And again, a very clear lake. And also the last one here is on the bucket list as well, is this helping Katie finish her Vermont 4K peaks and then bike between the peaks and do all the Vermont 4,000 in one day.
That's a great idea. And I feel like that actually makes it more appealing. It's almost that the 4K peaks in Vermont are just small relative to all the other ones. And I'm like, oh, what's the point? But if you make it a big and beefy day, I'm totally down.
There you go. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So those are all of our adventures. We've got a couple more listener questions here. This is a question that says, this might be a controversial topic, but how would you approach weight loss while adhering to a training plan? And so I think I would actually direct people to our nutrition interview with Kate Ward. That was pretty early on in our series of episodes. And the biggest principle that came out of that is that you can't actually optimize for performance at the same time as optimizing for weight loss. So we would say, if you have weight loss goals and if you've spoken to a doctor, for example, who says that you need to lose weight, we would, number one, recommend working with a registered dietitian who can help you do that in a safe way. And number two, only focusing on weight loss goals when you're not actively focusing on performance goals, because one is going to be at the expense of the other. I would also say I especially don't recommend weight loss goals for our young athletes. You've got to focus on fueling the work with the principles of triathlete nutrition that we've talked about, and your body will likely settle where it needs to be. But again, weight is only one factor out of many, many, many that influence performance, and I think it's a lot more productive to focus on some of the other ones.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, our next question says here, I'm curious about what stage in your triathlon careers you both were at when you got your first TT bike. That's a good question. So was it a big decision or kind of a given? What factors played a role in deciding it was time to get a TT bike? And what was the shopping process like, i.e. word of mouth, recommendation, or lots of online reading? And did you try multiple bikes or just one and then got it fit? So this is a great one. So for me personally, I did triathlons for a year or two and I used a road bike with aero extensions. And then when I was sure that this was the sport that I wanted to pursue, I went to my local bike shop who sold felt bicycles and they had a really nice TT bike. And so my local bike shop was able to provide a basic fit. And then that relationship with the local bike shop makes maintenance sometimes easier and faster. You can buy a bike and bring it to any bike shop and they will maintain it, but it's just really nice. When you buy the bike from them, you take it back to them and they're like, oh, we know this bike, we know the brand they have, and they may have like all the parts on hand as well too. So that's nice. And sort of my last point around here is that local bike shops are just super important to our sport, into cycling. So we just encourage people to support them. And, in this age of online shopping, and I've done this, I've bought frames from people online because they were on sale. But when I can, I just try to go to my local bike shops. And for TT bikes, I personally I like Felts, I like Cervelos, I like Canyons, but really any manufacturer will do this. Everybody makes a great TT frame. Don't worry about a quote being more aero than the other, because as soon as you put yourself on a TT bike or any bike, it doesn't become that aero. So it's really about the rider position. And the most important point here is that you get the proper frame size for you, and that you get a bike fit, and also that you like the color of the frame.
Yeah, TT bikes are expensive enough that you better like the color. So that's a big deal. It better look sleek and sexy and really be a bike that you're excited to bring around. I guess I'll just quick answer this question about when I got my first TT bike. It's sort of funny because I actually just had like a crappy road bike, and then I made my first real bike a TT bike because triathlon was my primary sport. And I think that served me pretty well because I've learned how to climb really, really well on my TT bike. I have actually done Vermont gaps on my TT bike, not Lincoln Gap, but I have done some of the gaps on my TT bike. So if you learn a TT bike, you can kind of do a lot on it, especially with a big enough cassette. But if you're someone who has a road bike, I would say if you get to the point where you want to be, super competitive, maybe podium material at Olympic or 70.3 distances or Ironmans, it's hard to do that without a TT bike. So I'd say that's a good time to be thinking about it. Once you're saying like, okay, I really want to be kind of an elite age grouper, you will have a big disadvantage if you're on a road bike because most people will be on TT bikes at that point.
Another question here, I sort of broke out this, there's a multi-part question here, but then it said, how much do disc wheels matter in your opinion? And I will say that they matter a lot if you want to be very competitive in your age group or in a cycling TT competition. Plus, they just sound cool. When you go by a guardrail, they go thump, 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 thump. So it's a really cool sound. But also, if you don't necessarily need a disc wheel, so any one of these deep rim wheels like Zip 808 or equivalent are really good. And I put a link in here to the Zip 808. You can see kind of the size here. But lots of manufacturers make them, MB and all kinds of people. It's just sort of this deeper wheel, not quite a disc. And then I'll say that a nice wheel set is, again, this Zip 404. And again, hit the link and see the size of them. A lot of sort of aero bikes, if you will, sell Zip 404. They're great for training. They're great for racing. So if you need one wheel set to rule them all, I would say that 404 equivalent's the way to go.
Just make sure that your valve stem is long enough because otherwise you might have an issue like I did.
Exactly. Yes, exactly right. Then they go on by saying here, any amazing bike shops or fitters in the New England area to recommend? For me, my go-to bike fitter is Fitworks in Waitsfield, Vermont. Ian there is a genius. They also have a location in Peabody, Mass, which also is really good. And then I recently heard good things about Grace Bicycles in Holliston, Mass, and I looked up sort of what they do, and they seem like a legit place as well too. But if you guys know of other places that you love bike fitting, certainly let us know. Especially in the New England area, we're always looking for recommendations.
Yep, and I've gone to Waitsfield for the Fitworks fitting there. I've also actually just done Landry's in Boston, has a few people that do the retool bike fitting, so that's very scientific, and I've had good luck with that. So if you're in the Boston area, that's also worth checking out.
And the last part here of this question was, can a triathlete be, quote, competitive podium material at Olympic and 70.3 distances without a TT bike? And my short answer is no. Unless you're a professional cyclist, you will need a TT bike or a very good aero fit on your road bike with TT bar extensions. So if you have access to like a wind tunnel at a professional bike fitter, you can make a road bike just as fast as a TT bike. But for most of us in general, like if you're really into triathlon, get yourself a TT bike.
And I would say an entry-level TT bike is probably going to be faster than a really nice road bike even. My first TT bike was not, I don't even know if it was carbon, but it was TT and it was fast. And so I could do quite well on that bike. Okay, a sort of injury question that I've gotten from a couple athletes who I threw in here. Something really common that we see in triathletes and runners is plantar fasciitis, so different types of heel pain. We're not doctors, but something that you can do if you're dealing with that is, number one, consult with a physical therapist or a sportsman doctor. Number two, get new shoes, go to a specialty running store that can help you pick those out. Number three, if you take a plastic water ball and you freeze it, you can kind of roll that under your feet. That can be really helpful. Number four, you recommended this to me, Jim, actually, but there's these insoles on Amazon that sound gimmicky. They're called Heal That Pain, HEEL. We've actually had really good luck with them helping with different types of plantar pain, so we're going to recommend those. And then number five, I think it's really important to stay hydrated. So if you're dehydrated, all that type of the tissue is going to get really, really dehydrated and feel worse. And finally, a Theragun can be helpful here. So any type of massage type stuff on the bottom of your feet can really help with different types of plantar pain.
Yeah, I had plantar fasciitis really bad for a couple of years. And then one of my friends said, who I was explaining this to him, and he said, oh, I had plantar really bad. Get this Heal That Pain insoles. They're like $35 on Amazon. I'm like, okay, well, that can't help. I need to have specialized. I need to go to a doctor and get all these specialized things, insoles. And okay, why not? I'll spend $35. And it turns out they're spectacular. And I like them so much that I put them in all my shoes. And I've recommended them to a lot of athletes, and they've really helped. And then also this Theragun, the reason why the Theragun is useful, especially if you've had plantar fasciitis for a long time, what happens is that basically the blood flow shuts off in that part of the world because your brain's just sort of like, it's been swelled there, and your brain just says, okay, I'm not sending anything more there. It's just sort of dead, if you will. And what that does is the Theragun sort of stimulates the area, and I think just tells the brain like, hey, there is something down here. Send some blood, send some signals down here. So the Theragun, like in that area, helped me a ton. So between Heal That Pain and the Theragun, I had plantar fasciitis for years and years and years, and got rid of both of it.
That's awesome. Really good tips. Okay, well, this is going to be a long episode, and we didn't even have main topics, so this works. But we're going to finish up with a challenge of the week, a mini news segment that we might roll out some of the time, and your pick of the week. So challenge of the week, this is going back to what I was talking about with fatigue early in the episode. It's important to get an annual physical with your PCP and get blood work. So in athletes, there's a lot of really common deficiencies, things like iron, ferritin, calcium, magnesium, vitamin B12, vitamin D, zinc. All of those things can be compromised in athletes because of what we do. So those and other things, thyroid conditions are pretty common. It's useful to get that type of blood work and just establish a baseline. And another challenge, if you don't have a PCP, you should get one. You want someone who you can trust, where if something comes up, you go and you're like, hey, I need blood work, and they order it for you immediately. So establishing that relationship while you're healthy is good, so it's not an additional stressor once you start not feeling good.
My challenge of the week is to go back to what we talked about at the beginning of this episode, which is that 6-step emotional stability exercise the next time you're having a bad run or a bike. And if you do that, reach out, let me know how it goes.
Love it. All right, so this is a new little segment. We might not do it always, but we're doing it today because it came in as a listener request. So shout out to Seb for sending this request. He was asking for an article, book, or movie of the week. So I am reading a new book right now. It just came out in June. It's called The Price She Pays, Confronting the Hidden Mental Health Crisis in Women's Sports from the Schoolyard to the Stadium. I feel like this is awesome for me to read as a coach. It sheds light on a lot of pretty serious mental health challenges that female athletes face, but it's interesting as an athlete too. So highly recommend that. Really good research and anecdotes talking about women.
And it's a podcast from The Art of Accomplishment, and it's called The Opposite of Trying. And then it sort of speaks a little bit to this emotional stability thing that we're talking about. It just really relates a lot to training. It's not about training. It's not an athletic podcast, but I think you'll find a lot of value in it, and you'll sort of get the hint of it, the opposite of trying, and I think you'll get a ton out of it as an athlete.
All right, let's finish up with gear pick of the week, the one and only. So we were talking a lot about trail and mountain adventures, and disclaimer here, shoes are really specific. Not every shoe is going to work for everyone, but I'm going to share the trail shoes that have worked for me. So this is the unisex Salomon S-Slab Ultra 3. I believe these are the shoes that Courtney Walter, the Ultra Goat, wears. And these are really good trail shoes for me. I like them because they're super durable. So I ran in Hoka trail shoes for a long time, but I was frustrated because I felt like a single presidential traverse would destroy my Hokas. And so these Salomons will usually last for like 400 miles for me, where I might only get 200 on my Hokas. And they have a nice little gaiter that keeps rocks out and a nice tie that kind of tucks in. So really love these shoes. And they happen to be purple, which is my favorite color. So another reason to get the Salomon S-Slab Ultras.
And we're going to hashtag Courtney DeWalter many times. Actually, we're probably going to put her in the title of this episode, like Courtney episode, whatever it is, 39 or something. Like Courtney DeWalter's go-to shoes and other miscellaneous items.
And other miscellaneous topics for sure.
Exactly. Okay, so my gear pick of the week, I've sort of been hesitant to put this in here because these shoes they're crazy expensive. I found them at a little bike shop actually down in Florida, and I was checking them out, and the guy who works at the bike shop walked up to me and said, you want to be careful with those shoes because as soon as you put them on, you're not going to want to take them off and you're going to want to buy them. And I'm like, no way. But I picked them up. I was like, oh, they're so silky smooth and they're super light. I put them on. I was like, yeah, you're totally right. I have to have these shoes. And he goes, that's what everybody says. So these are the Giro Imperial shoe. They are incredible road biking shoes. You can also use it for a long distance triathlon as well too. But I now have a couple pairs. I love them. I would not bike in anything else. Super light, super stiff, and just they're really they're almost like slippers. So highly recommend. But they do kind of break the bank a little bit.
Well, Christmas is coming in 5 months, so it's all good.
Yep, exactly right.
Put those on your list. Awesome. Well, thank you, listeners, for indulging us in this sort of grab bag episode. But thank you so much for all the content that fueled this. This is really coming from our athletes' experiences, our listeners' questions, and we just appreciate the engagement so much. So we will be back next week for episode 40. So exciting. Another milestone for the podcast. But in the meantime, if you'd be willing to give us a rating or a review, that helps us grow the podcast. It really is the way that we can get bigger and help more people through the Endurance Drive. So please check it out.
See ya, peeps.